It should be a good news announcement for Canadians, especially those living in the north. Today, a plan was unveiled to connect 70 remote communities in the Arctic and northeastern Quebec to faster wireless by the year 2025. But one of the companies that will help do that is Huawei. That company is based in China. Canada, of course, is in the middle of a serious diplomatic standoff with China that all started when Huawei's CFO was arrested in this country back in December at the request of American authorities. The U.S. has already banned government workers and government contractors from using Huawei's technology, and President Trump has taken steps to outright ban the entire company in the U.S. So how can Huawei reassure Canadians it's not a threat to national security? Unveils is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Huawei Canada. He joins me now in studio. Hi, Mr. Velshi. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it. I have to start off by asking you, was this announcement today an attempt essentially by your company to counter the fears and apprehensions Canadians have about the trustworthiness of Huawei?
Look, I think that's a fair question, but at the end of the day, Huawei Canada has been operating here for about 10 years. We have about 1,100 employees, and we've been selling network equipment to operators in the north for most of that time. And so this is very much an extension of a line of business we've already been in. That having been said, look, Huawei's been in the news a lot lately, not always under the best of circumstances. And so I think from my perspective, it's important that we share with Canadians a lot more about what we've actually been doing to contribute back to Canada.
And I understand that you're here representing the Canadian side of this company, but do you understand, I guess, the perception and the level of understanding Canadians have about the company's operations in other parts of the world, right? Like, that's where the concerns are stemming from. I don't think there are specific examples people are pointing to in Canada where they're like, this has been nefarious action on the part of Huawei, but there is concern about the way in which the company has conducted itself internationally. For example, an article out today about North Korea and Huawei aiding them in setting, the government there in the past in setting up a cellular wireless network.
Right. Look, I'm obviously aware of the concern. Huawei operates in about 170 countries, right? Canada makes up a very small portion of Huawei's overall business and its overall sales. But at the end of the day, the concerns about what happens outside of Canada, the way they manifest themselves in Canada would be through the activities of Huawei employees in Canada. And everyone who works for Huawei in Canada has to follow Canadian laws, right? Doesn't matter if you're a president or you're me or you're an engineer beavering away in a cubicle. The only laws that apply to you are the laws of our country, the laws of Canada.
What happens, though, if a Huawei employee travels to China? I mean, the national security laws in China are far different. If someone in the government wants to compel some sort of sensitive information, they demand cooperation when it comes to intelligence or security issues. So what happens then?
So I think there's two ways to look at it. So I've been to the Huawei headquarters in China now twice in the last 3 months. And I think you want to look at it from the perspective of Huawei globally and then Huawei in Canada. So globally, our founder, Mr. Ren, has been asked these questions. He's been asked, what would you do if you were to receive a request from the government of China that is inappropriate? And he has said that he would not follow it. And he sought legal advice from Clifford Chance and a local Chinese law firm on the legal case for not following it. And then he explained why he wouldn't follow it. And it's because even though we here call Huawei a Chinese company, and it was certainly founded in China, it operates in 170 countries, and the bulk of its revenues actually don't come from China anymore. And so he's made the case that to follow an inappropriate request would be suicidal for the company, right? And he sort of made the dollars and cents case. The way I look at it is that you also want to think about, the legal case here in Canada. And here in Canada, it doesn't matter if you're our president, Eric, our chief cybersecurity officer, Oliveira, our CTO, Rob, or me. The only laws that apply to us are the laws of Canada, and
not when you're in China.
Well, I mean, like when I'm in China, like there's certain things that you can do in Canada that you can't, do in China, right? I can't consume marijuana when I'm in China, I would assume. But when I'm in Canada, when I'm operating anything related to the Canadian business here, I have to follow the laws of Canada. So the activities that people are worried about, right, the espionage or what have you, they're illegal in Canada, and anyone who does those things here would go to jail, as they should. And I think we're talking about this abstractly, but just sort of in real terms. We've been here since 2008. We've supplied most of the major telcos and minor telcos here in Canada we've been working with security agencies under the security review program since certainly since 2013, perhaps even before then, and there's never been a complaint from either our customers, right, the Bell, Telus, and Rogers, or the smaller providers, or from the government of Canada, or from a security agency about any sort of inappropriate conduct or rules breaking on the part of our
But I feel like you're asking Canadians to say that Huawei Canada is completely and totally separate from Huawei writ large. And right now, if you open a paper this morning, you're reading about the U.S. saying that your company used an unofficial subsidiary to evade American sanctions with Iran, that they're aiding and abetting the North Korean of all governments in setting up a network there years ago. Like you're asking Canadians to do a lot here and to just completely separate the two. Is that really realistic?
No, I think it's totally fair to point out that Huawei Canada isn't this autonomous Canadian entity. Like, yes, it is a company in Canada, it's a private company in Canada, but it's a Canadian company in Canada that's part of a foreign multinational, right? So in the same way that Walmart Canada is part of a foreign multinational, McDonald's Canada is part of a foreign multinational, we're part of a very large foreign multinational that happens to be based in Canada. But the laws that apply to Huawei Canada are Canadian, right? And that's so it's not asking people to take like a leap of trust. It's asking them to recognize that the scenario where the laws of a foreign government are somehow going to apply and trump the laws of Canada.
Well, they would if someone's in China, to be fair. If an employee of Huawei, a Canadian employee, was in China working on behalf of Huawei and was asked by the government there to share some kind of information in the name of intelligence around, and not necessarily, there's no nefarious intent on the part of that employee, but to share some kind of information about the way in which our telecommunications system works in this country, they would be obligated under national security law in China to do so.
Sure. So I think maybe another way for me to address that question is to just think about on kind of the core engineering side, right? So on the engineering side, we sell equipment to operators, right? The Bells, the Telus, and the Rogers, and that equipment is reviewed by CSC and a third-party lab under the security review program. It's reviewed by the customer, the operators, and we don't have unsupervised access ever to the network of any of our customers. Which would be the operators. None of the data of the customers of the Bell, Telus, and the Rogers ever passes into the hands of Huawei, right? We operate in the radio access network, and there's no unsupervised access. So to put it another way, there's never any data of Canadians that is ever in the sort of the custody of either Huawei Canada or any other sort of entity in Huawei. So that's sort of how our business works here.
There's also, though, from a perception standpoint, the elephant in the room, and that is, of course, that following the arrest in Canada of the CFO of your company, Huawei internationally, 2 Canadians were detained by China. Do you feel that the two are linked? Do you think they are?
So look, I think we're all very concerned about their well-being, and I think all Canadians are concerned about their well-being. And it's no secret that this is a time of very deep anxiety and tension between our country and China. And I don't know the nature of the discussions that our government is having with the government of China behind the scenes or with the Americans. That's, like I work for a telco company. I work at Huawei Canada. I don't work at Global Affairs. At the same time, yes, it is the elephant in the room, but the tensions between the governments of China and our government here in Ottawa can only be resolved, like all complex geopolitical issues, by governments, not by companies.
Your company, though, according to the Globe and Mail, is petitioning this government for the release, essentially, of Meng Wanzhou, for the dropping of the charges against her. Doesn't that sort of go against what you're saying, that it has not, that it's just government to government? I mean, your company has involved itself.
Yeah. Our global CFO, as you pointed out, is under house arrest in BC, and she's represented by counsel, right, by experienced counsel, independent counsel, and they're the only ones who are authorized to speak on her behalf. So I really can't even speak about her case, which is before the courts. But our position is that Huawei Canada, we're a telco company, and we sell to equipment providers, and these sorts of complex geopolitical issues have to be addressed by governments, by our government and the government of China.
You're also at the same time trying to make the argument that your company is not, not going to jump when the Chinese government says jump. That you're not going to just hand over. Your CEO has made the case we would break the law if we had to, and yet this
Well, we would respect Canadian law.
yeah, but if you were in China, he said he would not hand over sensitive information. Does this not completely tie, I mean, Huawei with the Chinese government? The Chinese government has essentially detained 2 Canadians because they're upset about your CFO getting arrested. How are Canadians supposed to separate the two?
I mean, look, it's a very complex geopolitical issue, and it's one on which I'm actually personally reluctant to speak for fear of making it worse. That having been said, these sorts of geopolitical issues, these sort of tensions between countries, can only be resolved by governments and not by companies, right? So, from kind of a Huawei perspective, from a Huawei Canada perspective, all we can do is I can support my government here in Ottawa in its efforts to alleviate these tensions, right, and to get things back on track. There's really nothing beyond that a company can really do.
Is there any sort of advocacy being done on the parts of those 2 Canadians who are detained? Like any sort of effort on the part of Huawei to distance itself from the Chinese government seemingly acting on its behalf?
I mean, look, I've said that we're very concerned by what we're seeing, by their treatment. I think everyone in Canada is concerned. There's a number of issues of bilateral tension and anxiety between our country and China, and I simply don't know what efforts are being made between the government of Canada and the government of China, either with the United States or behind the scenes. That's something that our government has to lead, and it's just not something that kind of as a telco business we would become involved in, precisely because the risk that it would make matters worse.
Okay, understood. Thank you, Mr. Velshi. Appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Cheers. Hi, I'm Vashi Kapellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.